Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Adobe XD Daily Creative Challenge, day number 7. I remembered what day it was today. My name's Howard Pinsky. I'm a Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and a big hello, afternoon, or evening to everyone joining me live here on Behance, including Nyasha and Melville, Anna, Abdullah, Ariana, Sina, Alberto, Tim, Jack, and everyone else. If you are tuning in, let me know who you are, where you're tuning in from. I'm streaming live today from beautiful San Francisco. And we have a lot of fun stuff planned for you today. We're gonna be taking a look at the lovely hover trigger in Adobe XD. So let me hop over to my screen here. And this is where you're gonna find the Daily Creative Challenge landing page, behance.net/challenge/XD. We also have a Photoshop challenge run in the morning by Kathleen this week. So if you're into Photoshop, definitely check that out as well. So, big blue register button at the top. Go ahead and press the big blue register button so you're notified when we do release new challenges. And if you're brand new to this whole shindig, let me explain how this works. So every single day, Monday to Friday, you're gonna receive a new challenge. And that challenge can vary. Sometimes it builds upon the previous challenges. Sometimes they're completely different from the one before. It's always a surprise and a mystery, but we usually focus on a feature of Adobe XD to really help you learn something new and also build a portfolio of really cool items, or even a whole case study that you can put together, throw it on Behance, and maybe even get some jobs from that, so which would be pretty cool. You can also join us in our community chat. Let me hop over here and launch it. I did this yesterday, forgot to open it beforehand, but we have about 32,000 people in Discord right now. Not right now, but registered to our Discord server. We have 32,000 designers. We have about almost 900 people online right now, so it's a great place. You can introduce yourself, you can share your work. We've got some great channels over here to the left. Current challenge, if you're working on that, definitely post it in Discord. If you're still catching up on past challenges, which is totally okay, throw it in there. If you have questions about XD, if you want to introduce yourself, if you want to get tips and tricks, Discord's a great place, so definitely hop over there and have some fun. You can watch us live. So I'm live 11:30 Pacific time every single day. Kathleen is live, I believe, at 9:30 in the morning. Obviously, it varies per time zone. And then, of course, finally, share your work. You can also share it on Behance using the keyword XD Daily Challenge. So what have we done so far? Well, last week we started with repeat grids, one of my favorite features in Adobe XD. We moved on to auto animate. We touched on the drag trigger, plugins, component states. We touched on the voice triggers yesterday, and then today we're going to be taking a look at hover. And I know many of you have been wanting hover for a long time, and finally at Adobe Max just a few months ago, hover has been released along with component state. So we're going to take a look at that. So in specific, we're going to be designing a web experience that makes volunteering for and donating to local homeless shelters more accessible. And of course, we're going to be focusing on using hover. So I'm going to hop over to Adobe XD, and we're gonna get started. This is the template for today. Go ahead and download that, and if you're watching this in the future, the template will be there. If you scroll down to the bottom of Behance, you'll be able to find it. So here we go. We have some inspiration over here at the bottom. You know, a little bit of volunteering, donating inspiration, and then of course using a hover trigger over here. So I'm gonna show you how this works. We're gonna start off a little bit simple, get a little bit more advanced, and then I believe sometime, either tomorrow or Friday, we're gonna get even more advanced with some component states. Little hint for you. And if anyone has questions throughout the stream, definitely throw them in the chat. I will be taking a peek from time to time. All right, so here's a web artboard. Of course, you can use, 1200 pixels wide, you can use 1900 pixels wide, whatever best suits you. But what I want to start to do is just block out some elements, right? So I'm going to start with a rectangle, and I might just want an image in the background. And basically the idea for this particular page is that it's going to be fairly simple. There's going to be a map or an image in the background. There's going to be a map, and then on that map there'll be a few locations that you can hover over to see what shelters are around and what items they may need donating for. So I have this area here. I'm going to turn off the border. I'm going to set the fill to, doesn't matter what color you're setting it to, just so I can see it against the white background. And I may want to put an image into this shape. I'm gonna hop over to Finder. I already have one I downloaded right over here. Drop it, boop, right into the shape, and it masks it. If I wanted to, I can always double click on it, and adjust the mask if I need to, but looks pretty good. So I've got that done, and now I may want over top of it some sort of a map, right? So again, I'm gonna grab my rectangle, and I may want to just draw one out just like this. Perfect, just like that. That looks pretty good. I may want to round out the corners just a touch, just to give it a little bit of style. We don't want to go too crazy, because we're dealing with, you know, homeless shelters and things like that. You don't want to be over flashy and you know, super colorful. You want it to be very serious. So yeah, maybe I'll keep the border just a little bit, very subtle border. Now you're probably noticing that I've run out of space on this artboard. I may want to, you know, increase the size a little bit. So I can do that by simply clicking on the artboard, the name at the top, which I can just name Shelters, and then just dragging the artboard downwards a little bit. Now by default, it's gonna show me a viewport handle over to the left, and that basically tells me that anything above that handle will be visible immediately, and then anything below it will be accessible when I scroll. But if I want everything to be displayed at once, I can just grab that handle and drag it down just like that. And I can, you know, I can make the artboard as big or as small as I want. I'll give a little bit more breathing room. Perfect. I may also want to change the background. Maybe not solid white, but maybe a little bit darker, just like that. And maybe just to pop it out just a touch, I may want to add a little bit of a shadow. Nothing too crazy. I've talked about shadows in the past. You don't want your shadows too overly done. Just very subtle, just like that. Looks pretty good. All right. So we've got this area that we're gonna be using for a map, but of course we need a map. Now, previously there was a plugin that I showcased called Maps Generator. I don't know what happened to it. I don't know if the developer took it down or they run into some bugs or whatever, but you know, it's not there anymore. So what we're gonna be doing is hop back over to Safari, and there's a great website I use a lot called snazzymaps.com. If you haven't checked this out, definitely check it out. They have a lot of different styles. You can go to the Explore Styles tab at the top, and you can browse for whatever style you want. You'll be able to, you know, click on one of them. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but you'll also be able to search for a specific location. In that case, you know, in my case, I just searched San Francisco. And then if you are logged in, it's free to use. You can just download the image to your computer, which is great. And I do have that image right over here. So I just downloaded a pretty large, high resolution image of this map that I generated, and I can just draw it, drag it, boop, directly into Adobe XD. And again, just like with images, you can move it around, and you now have this map contained within that shape that we created, which looks really nice, right? So of course, now on this map, we need a few things. We need a location pin, and of course we need something that hovers when, you know, I'm just looking at the chat. I think it's finally catching up. It was frozen for a while. Hi, everyone. And we need, you know, when someone hovers, a little box will pop up showing what they might need, right? So we're gonna start by creating a location pin. And of course, we could grab an icon, we can do it that way, but I wanna show you how you can create your own, because we're starting to get a little bit more advanced. And it's actually pretty simple. I'm gonna grab my ellipse tool from the left, hold down my shift key to constrain it to a perfect circle, and just draw one out like this. I'll make it nice and large, but of course I can always, you know, make it smaller or bigger later on because it is vector. And I may want to change the color to, let's say, you know, pinkish red. That looks pretty nice. I'll turn off the border. And then, you know, we could just leave it as a dot, but we might also want to turn it into a pin. So what I'm going to do is double click, and it's gonna give me access to our paths. And I'm gonna grab the bottom pin, bottom node, whatever you wanna call it, point, whoops. There we go, just the bottom one, and just drag it down just a little bit. I'm holding down shift so it kind of locks to the center, right? Perfect. And if I want the bottom edges to kind of be a little bit sharper, just have to double click on it. Boop. There we go. And now we have this cute little location pin. But sometimes pins have a little bit of a cutout at the top. So to do that, one more time, I'm gonna grab my ellipse tool, hold down shift, draw out my little cutout just like that. Might want to adjust it just a touch. That looks pretty good right about there. Yep, looks pretty centered. And then what you need to do is you have to select both of those layers. So I have the top layer selected that I want to use for the cutout. I'm gonna hold down my shift key, click on the one in the background. Now I have both of those selected, and I can use the Boolean options at the top. The first one adds, but the second one will subtract. And when I press that, it basically takes that top shape, cuts a hole in the bottom shape, and we have a lovely pin icon. And of course I can spend hours making this pin icon exactly the way I want it to, but we don't have time, right? Maybe I'll, maybe I'll just double click just for a second, move this down just a touch. There we go. That looks pretty fancy, right? Looks good. All right. Oops, what did I do? Cut out. There we go. All right, we're good to go. So we've got this pin icon, right? And now essentially we want a user to be able to hover over this pin icon and something is going to happen. So to start off very basic, we need to create a component from this pin icon because you can't have hover without components and states. So I've got the pin icon selected. Now over here, let me just name it just for my sanity. Location icon. And over here to the right, you can create a component. And there's many ways you can create components in Adobe XD. You can use the Command or Control K shortcut. You can do it in the Assets panel. Lots of ways you can do it, but I'm gonna simply press this button here, and it's going to create a component with a default state. And our default state is this pin icon. But of course, we want to add some additional states, especially for hover. So back to the plus icon, I'm gonna press that one more time, and you're gonna see two options. One to create a new state, and one to create a hover state. And you're gonna notice that there's a little lightning icon beside the hover state. And that lets you know that it's gonna be automatically wired up. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. So I'll go ahead and press that. I'll accept. You can name it if you want, but hover state's a pretty good name for a hover state. And you know, once it's selected, just like it is now, any changes you make to this state will apply to the hover. So on a very basic level, let's just go ahead and change the color. I'll make it a little bit darker. Nothing too crazy, right? So now that we have two states, we have one default state and two, our hover state, which just a little bit of color difference, right? And here's what I mean by, you know, the hover states are wired up automatically. If I press the play button at the top, all I have to do, well, let me just make sure I have my default state selected. I just have to hover. And you're noticing it hovers, right? Nothing too crazy. But here's where things get a little bit more interesting. Is that even though the hover state in the component has these bounds on it, that's basically hugging this location pin, we can expand the bounds and add pretty much whatever we want to any of our states. So I'm gonna dive into this hover state here. Just gonna double click to go into it. And I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and just draw one out, just like this. And you're noticing as I'm doing that, and as I'm moving this rectangle around, the bounds of that component are automatically enlarging to fit the new objects that I'm creating, which is nice. I'm gonna go ahead and round out the corners just a touch, let's say 8 pixels. I may want maybe just to add a little bit of a gradient to this box. Again, nothing too crazy. You don't want, especially with shadows and gradients, you don't wanna go too crazy. I can add a very subtle border. And all of this just kind of helps separate that box from the background, which is a lot of grays and a lot of white. And I'll add a shadow. Move that down a touch. Maybe blur it just a little bit more. And maybe for this one, I will increase the opacity. Usually I decrease it, but possibly. I can always go back and make changes to it, but I kind of like the separation. It's a little bit much, so maybe I'll just drop it a touch more. There we go. And now it's just separated from that background just a little bit, right? Especially when you're talking about accessibility, these things are very important. So now that I have my box created, I can start adding some content. So I'm gonna go grab my text tool, and let's say this will be mission shelter. I don't know if these places actually exist, but you know, in this case, we're gonna run with it. I may want, maybe for this one, I may want all caps. So I'm gonna press the uppercase button. And maybe I'll go for, let's go for a semi-bold. Drop the text a little bit more. Pop it right about there. That looks pretty good. Maybe underneath we may want a location or an address. So I'm gonna just duplicate this. This we probably don't need uppercase. And maybe 123 Mission Street. And maybe it's, let's say 4.1 miles away. Drop the text a little bit more. And I'll go for, let's say, a regular, pop it right about there. I may also want to drop the opacity because it's not as important as the header. Just a little bit. You don't want to go too low, just like that. Great. I do want to zoom out a little bit just to make sure everything's visible. Looks like it is. Now, maybe below, we may want a section that shows what this specific shelter is accepting. So I'm going to just duplicate this down. Just type out accepting. just like that. I may want to bump up the opacity a little bit because this will be somewhat important. And then over to the right, we might want some icons. And I showed you this plugin previously. I'm gonna hop to my plugins manager, which you can get to at the bottom left of your interface. And let's go ahead and type out, let's just like food. That looks pretty good right there. Make this a little bit smaller so they are accepting food, right? And they might also be accepting clothes. So I'll just type out shirt. Make that a little bit smaller. I'll make sure all these line up and are the same size at some point. And maybe they're accepting toiletries as well. So toilet paper might be a good option. And then finally, they might also be accepting some sort of, water or liquids or something like that. So I'll just type out water and we'll go with this icon. Perfect. All right. Now I'm gonna move this one over to this side. Maybe I'll want them all to kind of line up evenly from each other. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure to select all the icons that I just dragged in. I'm gonna hold down my Shift key, select all of them just like this. And then at the top, I can press this icon here, which is gonna distribute all of these icons evenly, horizontally from each other. So I'm gonna press that, it's gonna do its thing, and I can go ahead and change the opacity if I wanted to, just like that. And everything's looking pretty good. And I may want to make sure that everything's grouped as well, just so that if I do need to move this line up or down, I can very easily select them all at once. So Command and Control G to group them and just name this accepting. Perfect. Now there's two more things I may want to add into this card. One of them is a button to become a volunteer. So we're going to press the rectangle tool. Maybe I'll draw one out just like this. That looks pretty good. Maybe you can make it a little bit bigger. And I may want the corners to be completely rounded, so I'll just grab those handles, drag them in like that. And I might want to choose a nice blue color that's gonna really stand out when someone pops this card open. I can turn off the border. That looks good. I can always adjust some of these things as I'm designing. Grab my text tool, and I'll type out, let's say, become a volunteer. Definitely don't want black for the text on a blue button. White will probably do. And because I want someone to press this button, I am gonna set the weight to, bold looks pretty good. I'll leave it right about there. Perfect. Now one more thing I might wanna add is a button to start getting directions. And to do that, I could go ahead and, I could create my own, but I'm lazy sometimes. So I'm gonna just type out directions. There we go, we got a button right here, our icon. Make sure it line, ooh, look at that. It's exact same size. I did not do that on purpose, but I'm gonna run with it. Make sure it's the same color. Maybe make this a little bit larger. And there we go. Things are looking pretty good. Let's zoom out and see what we're looking at. Now we could probably give it a little bit more breathing room. So I'm gonna move this up a little bit, move some of these around, just to really give a little bit more breathing room. And of course, with components, you can have components nested within components. So if I wanted to, I can also grab this button here and the text and turn this into a component and have that have a hover effect as well. So to do that, I'm gonna press the plus button beside component. Just make sure to name this, right? And then, just like we did before, I can create a new state on this component, hover state. I'm not gonna go too crazy with this. I'm simply going to change the color. Let's go a little bit lighter in this case, or maybe a little bit darker. Whatever works, right? And there we go. So now we have our default state and we have our hover state within a larger component with a default state and a hover state. And speaking of that, let's see how things are looking. So I'm gonna go to the top level of this location icon component, go back to our default state. So again, we have our default state, we have our hover state, and then within that, we have a component for the button with the default state and a hover state. So things are getting fun, right? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna press the play button at the top, and all I have to do now is hover. And there we go. Now you're probably noticing it faded in a little bit. You may want it to just appear. And in that case, that's happening because by default, hover takes on auto animate. But if you don't want that, what you can do is hop into prototype mode at the top. We have the little blue handle that's perking out. And all we have to do is change the action to transition with an animation set to none. That way, when you hover, it just appears. So you don't have to worry about auto animate or anything like that. It just does its thing. And of course, if I hover over top of, oh, that's right, that doesn't work yet. So if you have a hover within a hover, there's some weirdness going on. Nobody saw that. You did not see anything. But if that button was somewhere else, it would hover beautifully. So the last thing I want to point out is that now that we have one of these interactions set up, you don't have to redo the entire process again in order to, have another pin on this map with hover and that sort of thing. All you have to do is just duplicate it. So I'm going to duplicate it over here, let's say to Coal Valley. Don't know where that is, but it sounds like a great place. And now that I have an instance of this component, if I hop over to the hover state, I can just make some overrides. So this will be, let's say, Coal Valley Shelter. Let's say this is 237 Coal Street, very original, and 9.1 miles away. Maybe for whatever reason they are not accepting clothing. So I'll just move these in, just like that. Make sure they're nicely spaced from each other. And there we go. So now that we have a default state and a hover state, let's do one more. I'm gonna move this one over to, let's say, the dog patch. I don't know what that is, but let's run with it. Pop that there, hop into the hover state, dog patch shelter, and this will be 199 Dog Street. Let's go for 5.1 miles away. Let's go for 5.5 miles away. And maybe they don't accept water for whatever reason, right? And Tim is saying 221 Baker Street. Yes. All right, so we've got that done. We've got our default state on all of these. We've got our hover state set up. And now we just have to press play. And we can hover over this one, which is the mission shelter, hover over this one, which is the dog patch shelter, and the Coal Valley shelter. So all of these have been overridden. All the hovers work really nicely. Again, little bit of a goof. The hovers within the hovers don't work super well right now, but I believe the team is working on that. So again, nobody saw that. So there we go. We have created a little bit of a map, and of course you can expand on this and add maybe down here at the bottom, just drag this out a touch. You can grab San Francisco, grab your text, make this a little bit larger, so you can really start building out this web page that kind of showcases some of these shelters within San Francisco or whatever city you're working with. So that will just about do it. One more time, got the hover, everything looks pretty fancy, and there we go. So I definitely encourage you to expand on this, have a lot of fun with the hover effect, have a lot of fun with components and states, and then post your work in Discord and Behance using the keyword XD Daily Creative Challenge, or XD Daily Challenge, that's the one. I'll be back tomorrow with day number 8, and then day number 9 is coming up very soon on Friday. So thanks again for watching, everyone, and I will see you all soon.